is Sasha Schilbrack-Cole. I am a multidisciplinary artist. I'm a musician. I play drums and sing in the band Malevich, and I am a tattoo artist, printmaker, and an illustrator, as well as an educator in the arts in Atlanta. I kind of always knew that this is what I wanted to do. I knew ever since I was very small, I just liked making things and drawing, and my hands were always like active doing something. I'd be like, if I didn't have paper, I'd be like painting on my body or whatever. For a period of time, I think like getting into college and throughout high school, I had a lot of like guilt about pursuing the arts. Like it felt like a kind of a selfish pursuit, but I really like had some amazing teachers in that time and kind of framed it as something that could be more of a community practice and something that you get to do to enrich the world and to, you know, exchange ideas with people, and that your art can be political and it can be engaged, and to kind of think about your art as like a larger thing than just yourself. And that really was this like light bulb moment for me where I was like, oh my God, like this isn't just this thing that is for me. It can be something that is bigger than that. And I really jumped into fully committing myself to a creative career. But at the time, I really didn't know what that was. I didn't know if I was going to be a graphic designer or a concept artist or an illustrator or whatever. And when I went into college, I pursued printmaking, and that was also this another moment of just like, oh my God, this is my thing. I found this thing that sometimes, some of the prints that I had seen in my life, I didn't know the terms for. I didn't know what they were, but they were always things that really stood out to me, that were exceptional to me and exciting to me. And so when I started making prints, it really combined all of these different loves of illustration and graphic design, just like graphic, bold imagery, with something that's like really tangible as well and really hands-on. And it was super exciting to me. So I really jumped fully into the printmaking world at that time. And after school, I kind of fumbled around. I wasn't certain exactly still the way to apply the skills that I had or how to turn that into a career. Started playing music around that time and getting really into music, and music was a space where people needed illustration work, which was something that I was really excited for. So, you know, I make all the designs for my own band, but I was making designs for my friends' bands and starting to get hit up by, you know, other bands in the US, international bands, and that was really a lens to be able to like take my work and look at it through someone else's ideas or music or art, which was really exciting. And from there, I moved to Atlanta and got a residency here at the Atlanta Printmakers studio, and that was a really kind of informative time for me. I was making a bunch of music and making art for myself and starting to kind of figure out, okay, where are the ways that I can apply this to make a career? And then during the pandemic, I started tattooing, and that really became the kind of glue that held all of these disparate elements together. There was a ton of demand for tattooing, and I found myself really falling in love with tattooing as an art form where you get to really connect with another person in this very intimate environment and share your art with them, and then they get to carry it with them forever, which was not even something that I thought about before I got into tattooing, but I found it so compelling and exciting. So I really just jumped fully into tattooing during the pandemic, and it allowed space for me to have a totally flexible schedule where I can, you know, one day sit down and work on an illustration, or another day go into the studio and work with the band, and then work on a tattoo and work on prints whenever I want to. So it was really like in 2020 or so that like all of these disparate elements that I was interested in, but I wasn't exactly sure how they functioned together, all kind of congealed into a solid thing that held together like kind of an overall creative artistic career for me at that time. Yeah. So around 2020 is when it all started to make sense. I mean, I was doing all of these things prior to that, but it didn't feel like they were all stitched together into a solid thing. They were all kind of their own, they lived in their own worlds. And now I'm feeling like this is more of a set thing that all works together. Yeah, I mean, it gave me a structure and like a really great client base that I didn't expect, but I mean, I'm so grateful to the people who consume my work that I'm able to develop these like long-standing relationships where I very rarely have clients who I just work with once and then I never see them again. You know, I have a lot of clients who are coming back again and again to work on big projects, and that's like basically created total creative flexibility for me, because my biggest deterrent from other spaces like graphic design was that I didn't want to make work that didn't feel authentic to me or felt like I was making something purely for someone else. And so tattooing gave me the space to say, okay, this is what I like to do. This is the kind of imagery I like to work with. And then there was enough support for that now I'm able to have those boundaries of saying, well, this is what I do, and I know that my bottom line is I'm gonna be okay. I'm gonna be able to pay my bills. And then when it comes to making a print or making an illustration, I can hold those same boundaries and say, hey, this actually doesn't line up with the other work that I make, so I'm not gonna do that. And that was really freeing and kind of a big privilege that I don't think a lot of creatives get to have in their work. It really felt like, okay, I'm like doing a thing that is purely my thing, and that was really exciting. Yeah. I work at Sparrow, which is a studio over in the Inman Park, Old Fourth Ward area, right off the Beltline. It's a really beautiful space that I was going to get tattooed at before I started working there, and I feel really lucky. Like, all of the other artists there are really like, they're artists first, and that's really cool because everyone has their own like flavor that they bring to the tattoos that they make, and there's a lot of chance for discussion and collaboration, and it's been a very freeing and flexible space to work in. And it's also just like a beautiful space to work in. There's tons of natural light, tons of plants, cool art up. Doesn't feel like kind of, and I don't mean this disparagingly, but like the traditional idea of the tattoo studio where it's kind of a dark hole in the wall space and there's like some gruff, angry guy at the door who doesn't really want you to be there. It feels very welcoming, and it's a cool spot. I'm a huge nerd, and I've made the analogy all the time that I feel like I've like multi-classed in an RPG. I've like spread myself over all these different little skill sets. And for a while I felt like it was actually kind of a detriment to me because I didn't have this one focused thing that I was all in on. But the further I've gotten in my career, the more it's like been a huge benefit. You know, I have one, like you say, like there's just changing your environment, changing what you're working on creatively can be something that, you know, there's days when I'm working on a song with the band that then I'm like, oh, actually, this is kind of getting me thinking about this other thing that I was working on, or vice versa. I think they very much inform each other, and that I'm the type of person who, as much as I like to get obsessive and just focus on one project, I also will burn out really fast on that thing. So being able to change out what I'm working on and keeping myself excited by different things has allowed me a space to always be making stuff and never feel like, okay, I'm totally burnt out on this project, I'm totally burnt out on this medium, I can't do this anymore. And so that flexibility is really nice. And I think as I have developed these relationships inside of these different communities, whether it's the music community, you know, the fine art community, or more of like design stuff, they've all started to like feed into each other. And the tattoos especially too now. I have clients who are tattoo clients who I see come to shows. I know plenty of people, you know, through music who I've gotten to do illustration work for, or I've gotten a tattoo. It's really like a web of relationships that's been super beneficial to me. And I think that the people who are willing to say, oh, I like what you do in this space, I bet what you do in this space is cool too. Those are the people that, you know, I have friends, now friends who were once just clients who they said, oh, will you do this illustration for me? And then our bands played a show together, and then I tattooed them, and you know, we are now friends, and we're both lifting each other up. And I think that that's like the ideal way for me to function in an arts community, where you're building a web of relationships that are all kind of like, you know, raising the level for everybody. I think ultimately it comes down to the people in Atlanta. Atlanta is really spread out. There's all these disparate little communities. They're all doing their own thing. It's both, it's a very diverse city, both demographically and creatively diverse city. There's all kinds of different stuff happening. I think that, what's the best way to put this? Being in the South and being in Atlanta specifically, there's a lot of systems that are not super hospitable to the arts at play, and sometimes it feels like the city is fighting against the arts, but the people and the scrappiness that comes out of people in response to that is really amazing, and you get a community of people who are really just deeply invested in making a scene that is going to be a space that anyone can find themselves in. And I think that response to adversity is what is kind of at the core of the Atlanta art scene and music, and a lot that comes out of Atlanta. My band Malevich started back in, I guess, end of 2015, kind of beginning of 2016. Me and one of our guitar players, Josh, we were both in other bands. I had filled in for his old band, and there was a moment when we were both kind of looking around at where our bands were and what we were doing, and both of us were like, let's be intentional about starting a new project that can allow us the space to be as ambitious as we would like to be. We wanted to tour as much as we could. We wanted to release as much music as we could in as focused of a way as we could. So it was kind of created with the intention of really pushing the project as far as we could take it, which was something that we didn't feel like we were able to do with our previous projects just because other band members had moved or didn't have the same priorities. Those projects were great, they were really informative to this, but we set out with this project to be a touring, active band that wasn't purely playing local shows. And so as we started that project, the members have changed a little bit. It's me and Josh, as I mentioned, started it, and then we picked up our bass player, Daniel, and we had a standalone vocalist at the time, a guy named Will. And he's a great dude, but he went on to go work on his PhD and left the band, and our friend Connor came in and started playing second guitar and doing vocals as well. So really, that was, I guess, 2018 that we really hit, okay, this is the lineup, this is how we're doing this. And it's been really from that point that we feel like we've everything settled into the place it was supposed to be. And that was right before we released the last full-length record, Our Hollow, in 2019. So that was kind of the arc of us getting started. Going into it, it kind of naturally happened that we all ended up delineating roles for everyone in the band. We're very DIY minded from the beginning. We wanted to do as much of the management of the band, the visual identity of the band, the songwriting, everything we wanted to do in-house. And so it just happened that I was the person who was most equipped to do the art, and I started to kind of develop that visual identity for the band. As things progressed, Josh became our main tour booking person. Daniel has been really involved in the local scene, booking shows. He used to run a art space called The Bakery, or he was the talent buyer at The Bakery. And then since Connor's joined the band, he's an audio engineer. So he has a studio that he runs that's allowed us a lot of space to record our own stuff and demo and practice in his space. So we all kind of have different work that we're able to put into the band, and everyone has their lane that, while it's a democratic process and we talk to each other and work on things together, and I don't think we would make any big decision without considering the whole band, we all have our space that is our space in the band. And that's been a really, really important part of being a band. A successful part of being a band for us is that we're able to be self-managed and book our own tours and promote ourselves at home and out of state and do our own art, and all of that has been really foundational to the identity of the band as well. I definitely, when I make art for the band, I have to put on a specific hat and think a specific way. It's a little bit weirder, a little bit darker than something I might make for a tattoo, for example. Although there's crossover, I think all of my art kind of sits inside a emotional space that feels relatable to each other. But with the band, there's definitely, I think we're all drawn to like these kind of like body horror, and also I'm really into like medieval prints. I'm really into surreal, kind of sometimes twisted, weird kind of looks at society, and so trying to kind of synthesize all of that into something that feels cohesive and makes sense is usually the goal with the band. And it's a funny process because, you know, when you're working with a client as a commissioned artist, there's a certain amount of back and forth that you have in that space, and I think there's a little bit of that in the band. So usually what happens is that we'll have something that needs art, you know, whether it's a shirt or a record or whatever, and I'll sit down and I'll develop some ideas and kind of present it to the rest of the band as I would present those concepts to a client. So I'll do some rough sketches, I'll get some compositional ideas, and then I'll write up kind of a proposal of like, okay, so this album cover is gonna have these elements in this place. I'm looking at this as my reference. We're gonna use this as our color palette. By and large, the guys trust me and we're all on the same page, and it's usually just like, that sounds good. But sometimes, I mean, they're all really creative and smart people, and sometimes they'll say, oh, you know, that actually is a little bit too similar to this that we did before, or what if we brought in this element, or I've been looking at this artist a lot. Have you seen this? And there is, you know, some amount of collaboration that happens kind of at that stage where, again, they're all really engaged in art as well, and they all have their kind of visual identity that they see for the band too. So generally though, we're on the same page and we all like a lot of the same stuff, a lot of the same kind of aesthetic. We are usually not a lot of arguing or anything like that goes into it. Oftentimes I'm just like, hey guys, here's the reference is this panel from this manga, and I know we all really like that, and they're like, cool, let's do it. You know, it can be as simple as that sometimes. Yes, we say that a lot. We've got 1 million black shirts and everybody's got 1 million black shirts, and we were like, we need to come to this. We've had some success with other designs that were like brighter or just different than what you'd expect from your usual metal band. And also just like a chance to display kind of a juxtaposition between some of the harsher elements that we touch on in our music and our imagery with something that's a little softer or more feminine, because I don't think any of us as people, you know, walk around as like dour, like metal guy. Like, we're all pretty soft, and we have that side to us as well. So it's both appealing in that respect, but also that I personally have always loved that juxtaposition between something that feels very dark and extreme with something that feels gentle. And so it's something we've done with the band throughout our career. We did like a whole run of CDs early on where all of the packaging was really dark and then the CD itself was bright pink. And just kind of like slipping that side of the band into the imagery that we use has always been fun, and has been something that I think also like people really respond to. People see that and they're like, I've never seen something that looks like that at a metal show before. I'm getting that. And that's always like, it's really fun. So yeah, trying to have fun with it, you know. Oh my God, yeah. I mean, both with the band and with my personal art, at times I've found that it can be, you know, something that a line that I've walked, because sometimes my art feels too personal or too kind of emotionally intense or something. And so in certain contexts, you know, in galleries and things, I've struggled to find the place for it. But then when you find the community, you find the people who respond to it, it's so amazing to have someone come up and look at the thing. I actually had this just like a couple months ago. I was doing some markets and selling prints, and someone came up and they were looking through all my stuff, and there was this old print that was a self-portrait that I did, and I just kind of threw it in with the rest of the prints that I brought, not expecting anyone to buy it. I was like, well, I just have this, I might as well bring it. And I made it at a time in my life where I was like quite depressed, and they saw it, and the guy sat with it for a second and looked at it, and then he walked away, and then he came back and pulled it out and was like, I have to get this. And he was like, It was like this self-portrait, and it was a time when I was like working the night shift at a restaurant, and I would just come home and just like stare at the wall and zone out. Like it was this, like my brain was processing at like 4 a.m., you know, an entire day's work. And he was like talking to his girlfriend about it, and she was like, why do you want that? Like that's like kind of like a sad picture. And he was like, you've clearly never worked the night shift. And I was like, how did you know? How did you know that? like he connected with it on such a personal level in a way that I would have never expected. And then he and I talked about it for a while after that. And I've had a few experiences like that over my artistic career, where when you actually connect with someone who really gets the thing that you're making on like a visceral level, it makes it all worth it. You know, it makes every time that someone didn't connect with it totally meaningless, because I think that the reality is, especially if you're making weird, challenging art, 90% of the people that see your work, they're not gonna get it, they're not gonna like it. I don't like 90% of the work that I see. So I don't expect that out of the vast majority of people, but those moments when someone really connects with the thing that you've made, that's huge. When you're making something that feels authentic, I think you're opening up, with your vulnerability, you're opening up a space for that. And it's rare, but it happens, and it's huge. It's very like, it like deeply resonates, you know? Every time that's happened to me, like I can think of like a few examples, you know, over the years of where it's just like someone came in and they just immediately got it. And that is, I remember those years later, you know, I remember those a decade later, and I don't remember everyone even who I've tattooed, you know, someone I've sat with and talked with. Sometimes they come back in and I'm like, when'd you get your last tattoo? They're like, you did my last tattoo. And I'm like, oh, okay. But like those moments where like you are just like totally in sync about like understanding the thing, like those are huge. And that's not to discount the connection that you might make with someone over a tattoo or whatever, but there's just those rare moments when it really all clicks, yeah. You know, there's one that I come back to a lot. It was with an old band. I used to play in this emo band, and it was the first show we ever played out of the city. We lived in Athens at the time, and we were playing a show in Memphis at this DIY art space, and there were a couple other touring bands on the bill. I don't think we made any money. I think maybe 10 people paid to come in, but I had this feeling where I sat down at the merch table after our set, and I looked out at everyone in the room, and just, I was like, this is it. Like this is what I've always wanted out of making art, to get to travel and share it with people, and to feel connected with a space that's like a community art space, and to get to make connections with other artists who are also traveling. I mean, I think I was like 19, and that tour was like 4 days long. It was not a real thing, but it felt so, like you say, it was a catalyst of like, this is a spark and I need to nurture this thing. I need to like find this feeling and follow it as far as I can follow it, because it was very resonant at the time. Malevich has played Memphis multiple times, and every time I drive past that road, I'm like, I remember that show there. That was huge, you know? Like, even though it was just basically a throwaway show that probably, you know, the local promoter was like, this really didn't shake out the way I wanted it to. Like, they're feeling like people are disappointed, but I'm like, just like glowing, you know, because it was very impactful for me. I'm sure if I really sat and thought about it, I could, you know, point to a dozen moments like that that have been huge for me, and in different paths, you know, whether it be tattooing or music making or illustration or whatever. Like, there's all of these things that I come back to, but that one in particular stands out to me in my memory. So the band has a lot of big stuff coming up this year. We are about to release a new EP, and then we're going to be going on tour this spring. So we're going to be going up to the Midwest and Canada, and then back down the East Coast. And then hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll be touring Europe in the fall. So those are both huge. We're going to be recording a new record this summer. That's really exciting. So the band is really like, we've been kind of hunkering down, writing and like recording and making new stuff, and we're starting to hit that point where it's we're actually getting to share it with people. So I'm really, really excited about that. Aside from that, I'm excited to get to make a bunch of cool tattoos, and I've got some cool illustration projects coming up for other local bands that aren't, they're just kind of in the starting phase, but I'm excited for them. In the arena that I work in, the work generally comes to me at this stage in my career. I've been able to kind of cultivate a style and a look to my work, and especially in the tattoo world, that's reached a point where people are reaching out to me and I'm booked a month or two ahead of time. But in the illustration world, depending on what part of it you're in, things function differently. So for stuff like with other bands in town, that's usually someone reaching out to me, generally someone who I've made some connection with, my band's played a show with, they've seen my work somewhere. That's not always the case. I've had a couple years ago, I did art for a band who was in Finland, and I've never met those people before in my life. So it depends, but usually those are like direct connections that I'm building with someone over time. For more commercial illustration stuff, the whole process of like reaching out to creative directors and dealing with that side of the illustration world is all pretty new to me. So I've done some of that, but by and large, the majority of my work comes out of just building those relationships directly with someone over time. And like, I've been really lucky to not have to do as much of the annoying self-promotion of like being like, hey, can I do this for you? Can I do this for you? Because I've been able to like really build those relationships to get me to a point where, I think I was saying to you earlier, I have tattoo clients who I've tattooed them 6, 7, 8 times, and then they come to me and they're like, hey, I want a back piece, and that's a whole project in its own right. So working on a lot of big long-term projects with people who they're excited by that creative side of it too. So we finish up one thing and they're like, hey, I have this idea, and we just kind of follow that thread, and that's allowed me a lot of space for creativity and being flexible with my time and my schedule, because I don't have to chase it down as much. We're sitting in the Atlanta Printmakers studio. This is like a multidisciplinary art space. It's a nonprofit down in Hapeville. I originally moved to Atlanta to get to take part in a program called the Emerging Artists Residency here that highlights young artists and gives them a chance to make a body of work with a stipend and studio time that then gets shown in a gallery. After that, I started teaching this space. I teach etching here, and the Atlanta Printmakers studio offers so many great opportunities to people who want to get into printmaking or people who have been printmakers forever. And I highly encourage anybody who's at all interested in printmaking, whether you want to learn how to screen print your own shirt or carve a woodblock, to come and take a class. It's a really amazing space. Even if you don't make art yourself, we have a gallery space here and regular, really cool art shows. I can't say enough good things about the Atlanta Printmakers studio. Kids who are trying to get into the arts and acting as like a mentor for them, giving them prompts and things, and just like I'm giving them stuff where I'm like, okay, this is gonna feel like really basic and like maybe like kind of dumb, but like this is the work that it's how you start a project. If you don't know how to like do a loose sketch and refine it and run it by someone, talk through like the whole planning process. And even if you're the only person who you're working through that process with, you got to know all these steps, or else, because that is the hard work. It's the like when you put your brain to it. The actual rendering is like the last 40% or something. It's the hump that you have to get over to get to that point. That's where all of the mental energy comes into play. Yeah, I sometimes that's how I feel about hiring you guys to make shirts. Like, I hate printing shirts. I worked in a t-shirt printing place. There's so many extra steps that come into printing on fabric versus printing on paper. So different. And like, you need so much extra gear and stuff. So many more things could go wrong, and I'm just like, it's not worth it to me to spend all that extra time. I would be losing money to spend all that time to have all that set up, because that's not my main goal, you know? So, sometimes you gotta do it. I think ultimately the biggest advice that I could give is to find the ways that you can be resilient and be able to stick to your guns, because it's really that extended practice of doing a thing that's going to lead you to any kind of results in that thing, whatever creative career it may be. I feel like so often people get thrown off by not immediately seeing the success that they want out of their work, and really being able to structure your life in such a way that you have something that's holding you to continuing to make that work. Even if you're, working while you're doing it at another job, or, you have all of these demands of your life, you still carve out that time to be consistent and come back to the thing and come back to the thing. Because the reality is that the majority of the world doesn't make it easy to be an artist. It doesn't pave a path and show you a clear path to success, whatever that means for you, So when you are able to be the person who just stays in the room and continues making the stuff that you want to make, people take notice of that, both in just the sheer amount of time that you contribute to it, but also they'll see your growth in that. And if you trust in yourself and trust in your creative process, whatever that pursuit may be, it will lead to something if you stay on it and stay resilient and believe in the fact that you can do it, and it will turn into something. At the same time, you got to be flexible. So like the resiliency will get you there, but then when the opportunities come up, you have to be able to bend and figure out the ways to make them work for your life. And that combination of staying true to your path, but also being willing to be creative with it and be flexible, needs of what that path actually looks like. Those two things together will lead you to whatever success looks like to you, I think.